Welcome to Sports Geek Amplify, where we profile sports technology solutions to drive results for your sports business. In this Sports Geek Amplify episode, we learn how Trajektory can help you unlock value and revenue across all your sponsorship assets. Here's your host, founder of Sports Geek, Sean Callanan.
Welcome to Sports Geek Amplify, presented by Seat. Seat will be in Salt Lake City, July 14, 15, 2023. You can register at seatconference.com. In this episode, we are talking with Alex Kerr from Trajektory. Alex, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. Happy to be here. Long-time listener, first-time participant, I guess is what you would say.
Yeah, well, we will take that. And again, I guess I have to start. I mean, I started Sports Geek saying we needed more Sports Geek in the world, and I use the phrase "steal with pride." First of all, I love the T-shirt. So I love seeing more Sports Geeks in the world. My lawyers say I haven't got a leg to stand on when I keep telling people to steal stuff. So great to see you repping Sports Geek.
Can't wait to get the legal cease and desist letter at some point.
No, exactly. So first of all, what I want to know is, I guess, find a bit more about your founder story and how Trajektory came to be before we sort of dive in on the product itself and what it does. How did you get your start, and how did you become move from sport to being a founder of a product?
I think the origin story, which might be different from some, is I actually never ever anticipated working in the sports entertainment industry. I sort of incidentally, but very fortunately, fell into it during grad school when I was getting my MBA, and I had a really great opportunity to mesh data analytics with strategy and with marketing at Monumental Sports and Entertainment out in Washington, D.C. So worked in the marketing department, helped build their initial business intelligence department out there, and was working on all things primary, secondary research. But one of the things that fell under my purview with my team was sponsorship data and analytics. And lo and behold, we were responsible for having to storytell back to sponsors and how they performed at the end of the year. And it's one of those sort of interesting rites of passage if you do analytics and reporting with sponsorship, where it's not that easy and it's super, super incomplete. And, a lot of the reports that I think the industry at large puts together reports in a lot of odd ways, right? We got you 1 million people came to the stadium. We sent out 5 emails. We posted to social 35 times, and your value on television was worth $100,000. Please spend $2 million with us next year. And so it was kind of always like hitting your head against the wall, trying to figure this stuff out and report with integrity. So I did that for a number of years. Absolutely loved it. Had a lot of great people I worked with there. I eventually had a cool opportunity to go back to Chicago, where I'm originally from. And I got to work on the brand side. And all of a sudden, I was investing tens of millions of dollars in sponsorship. And lo and behold, now that I'm cutting the checks, I was getting very little to absolutely no insight in return. Like, here's a pretty picture of your brand, but that's about all we got. And so over the course of a number of years, early in my career, sort of came to this understanding and sort of epiphany that data and reporting is systemically broken in the industry, and it's really, really difficult to get to, whether or not you're cutting the checks or doing the reporting. And so eventually said, to heck with this, this is a problem. And I found a couple other like-minded individuals that had worked on the agency side and the brand side and the team side throughout their careers. And we said, there's got to be a better way to do it. And so we said, to heck with it, and started building Trajektory in earnest. To try to solve, I think, a problem that we had all seen, lived, and breathed firsthand throughout the industry. So, yeah, that's a little bit of my background and how we got to where we are with Trajektory.
So, I mean, that's it really deserves a mini series, and we've really just skipped over it. But, I guess, the fact that you worked on both sides, and you use the term, storytelling, because you're trying to, because it's sort of to fill in the gaps because you didn't have the actual numbers, because you were trying to bring them on the journey, and so is that sort of where the point, like the fact that you went from, hey, there's those two parts of that mad scramble, that recap time. Hey, did we deliver what we said we delivered? How do we tell them that? And like you said, it's the disparate nature of all the different pieces that you had to sort of try to give some cohesive manner, which becomes that storytelling element, which, makes it sound made up. And it's partly was because you were sort of pulling pieces from different places. But then when you're on the brand side, like that, was that there was more sophistication happening of why is this money going out, and needing some more harder numbers? Do you think the force, the immovable force or the force was coming from the brand side for that justification piece?
Right.
Is that where you sort of got more insight to say they're not believing the story, so to speak, and they need harder numbers? And it was, CMOs that were pushing to get firmer numbers on what they were spending in the sponsorship space?
So I think you're dead on. And it depends on the brand you're working with, right? Some brands will sit there and say, hey, look, we're comfortable investing $50 million a year in sponsorship, and we don't need the ROI or the data to prove it. But, I think one of the things that we saw and we continue to see is in a post-COVID world, smarter brands are now being more accountable, and they have to be more accountable internally, to your point, to say, hey, like, where are these dollars and cents going, and does it make sense for us to spend it? And so, one of the things that we at least had internally at our organization was, well, okay, we're fine taking risks and allocating cash and resources in places, but the smarter brands today are now starting to say, hey, like, we're spending in sponsorship, that's fine, but is the juice worth the squeeze, and are we getting this in return? And so I think a lot of the smarter brands today are certainly moving in that direction. So no, I think that's dead on.
And so from your product Trajektory, what was your background in, you said you found some like-minded individuals, but how did you go from this is a problem to this is a product? Like, I tell the story, I was formerly a geek. I used to code and do those kind of things. How did you start getting the product built? What was that initial journey like?
Wow. That could probably be its own 45-minute conversation at least, and probably over drinks too to share. It's so my background is traditionally in stats and math and business intelligence and strategy and data and analytics. And so for me, it was understanding that there's data over here, right? And there are ways to use high integrity to extrapolate on that data into something that makes statistical sense and storytell with it. So I knew that there was data over here, and there has to be a way to better aggregate this information and get it in front of the people that are really making decisions and that could be impactful for. But as it relates to coding and building a product, it's crazy to look back. I had no idea. It's like, wow, I think we need a data warehouse, and somehow this data has to be translated, and somehow it has to be organized really well. And so it was a pretty arduous process at the beginning to have to start out and have to figure out what are the things that I don't know that I need to become a better expert at, and who are the people that, I really need to help sort of bring this product and bring this idea to life. And so, it's kind of cliche to say it takes a village, but, the reality of it is kind of crazy to think about that you started in this place where you had an idea, but to actually productize it and build it. And very fortunate for me, I had a couple of co-founders, one that was on the engineering side and one that had, operations experience in her background. Without them, we never would have been able to do it. But there was a lot of work and a lot of, I think, methodical design that went into building a platform that was really going to do it the right way, as opposed to, I think, a lot of technology which exists out there, which is let's just run and we can sort of fix it later.
Yeah, and I think, again, a lot of times that I was in tech products and in development mode, it was really the voice of the person coming up with the requirements of what they wanted and having a really strong understanding of what the customer wanted. And I think that's the advantage that you had. You'd been in the seat, writing those recaps, trying to understand what had been sold and saying how it had been sold. So you knew what they wanted and the data they needed to pull and the reports that they wanted and how it would make their life easier there. But then you also had the brand side and the diving in of, well, we want these stats. So were you sort of talking to your geeks, which is, you need to be able to understand how to talk to your geeks, say, this is what I want it to look like and this is what I want the outputs to be. Do your great stuff in the black box underneath, but that's what we want.
I'm glad you said that, because it also does feel a little silly at times. Like, at least when we were talking to like investors early on, and it's like, trust me, like we actually sat in these seats, and none of the other technology companies that exist within the space have the same type of experiences that we had. Like, we just get it. And it sounds kind of like a piffy, like silly thing to say, but I think one of the things that we've really found in spades with a lot of the groups that, one, we talk to, and two, that have, that are our clients, one of the things that I think really does come to the top, and we hear a lot overwhelmingly, is you guys really get it, right? Like, you understand what it was like to be in the trenches and like getting an LED report in a CSV file that was a total freaking mess. And like, you kind of laugh about it now, but I don't think most vendors or tech that exists out in the marketplace today really understands like the true day-to-day, hourly, minute-by-minute struggle that a lot of these teams and organizations and brands and agencies deal with. And so while it does sound sort of silly to say, yeah, we sat in the seats and we have a different perspective, I really do think it has gone a long way with really understanding the consumer and building a product that, certainly both on the surface and when you get under the hood is differentiated and was clearly designed with purpose to try to solve the things that we understand are challenges. So
people are probably listening and going, hey, Sean and Alex are talking about Trajektory. I don't actually know what it is right now. They're really selling me on it, and I understand they're solving a problem. So when someone says, hey, what's Trajektory? Have you got an elevator pitch? Do you say, hey, this is what it is?
Shortly and simply said, we help the world's biggest teams, leagues, brands, and agencies maximize their sponsorship revenue through both driving revenue and retention with their partnerships. And we do all of that using data. So that's the elevator pitch. But what does that actually mean? Most, whether or not it be teams or leagues or agencies or brands, they're likely using some type of vendor that does some sort of social media analysis or television, right? The Nielsen's and the Repucoms of the world. We do that. We believe we do both of those things better than anybody else in the marketplace, but we're also doing the rest and solving the picture for the rest of digital and non-digital. So all the in-arena, LEDs, static signs, premium areas, radio, web, email, mobile assets that are going out. We've built a data and infrastructure that can pull all that data in. So you can go from a world that has typically only been reporting on two things, social and television, to now reporting on over a dozen, right? And so the thing that I usually equate is, would you invest in a stock portfolio if you only had 10% of the overall picture? We're helping bring light to that other 90% of the portfolio that typically has fallen by the wayside.
So it does open up that whole platform rather than that, I guess, that piecemeal approach of it being beholden to the commercial folk and then the analytics folk to go and get all of those different spokes of the wheel from different partners, from different platforms. Like you said, some will be a CSV file, some will be from a tool, some will be from a third-party vendor, or some will be from a trusted source. Sure. And then they would be merging it in Excel spreadsheets, or it would be, that's slide 6 on the deck and that's slide 7 on the deck. So what Trajektory does is sort of pull all those together to give both your commercial folk and your sponsorship servicing folk a picture of that throughout the year as the data is coming in, but then also increases the visibility in the organization of what is actually being delivered by the different departments, whether they be your TV, your radio, your digital, your social.
That's dead on. And the one subtle piece that I would add on to that, which often isn't thought of as being extremely important, but has, I think, won over a lot of hearts with certainly brands and the teams that they work with, is it's having a consistency with how you're solving that puzzle and having a consistent methodology in a really highly integrity-driven way. And so a lot of what happened and what happens today is brands will ask, their organizations that they're working with, tell us about the methodology, right? And all of a sudden the answer is, well, we do it one way on social, we do it a different way on television because we have a different vendor, we do a lot of our own back of the envelope math, and we have different metrics for all this different type of reporting, if they even do that. Yep. But what we're trying to solve, or what we solve by bringing all this data together, doing it in a programmatic and a turnkey way, is we also have a consistency in methodology across the board in terms of how we're evaluating all of these things together. So consistent metrics with valuations and engagements and impressions and reach, but doing so in such a way that's dynamic based on market, dynamic based on the asset. And so there's a consistency with how these things are being evaluated. And that has really translated well into helping teams as well as brands and agencies and everybody across the stack really better understand and comparing these things tit for tat. So how are these things performing in relative order and magnitude to one another? And that has been a real big unlock that most people don't necessarily realize on the surface of when you're able to actually truly compare how these things are performing. That helps with optimization, it helps with revenue, it helps with retention, and a lot of things across the board.
So are you finding, like, I take it, in some instances, are you finding that there's clients that are fearful of that information? They're not sure what they've sold it for, or they've undersold it or oversold it. And there's, in some cases, there's been nice surprises, or information is power. But have you seen sometimes some reticence? Sometimes people being happy, being stuck in the grey and moving forward, but some of that clarity is actually making things easier.
That's an awesome question. And the short answer is there are certainly situations that are out there where, data can be intimidating, right? And there are certainly cases in which it's rare, but there are cases where someone might be selling something for $500,000. And the reality is it's probably only bringing in $450,000 worth of value. That can certainly happen. That's not what we traditionally find. More so, and the reason for that, by the way, is a lot of those things typically aren't being reported on. And so a lot of what we're able to do and how we help, our different clients drive revenue, like tangible revenue, is we're helping them uncover $5, $10, $15 million of value that they never reported on previously, right? Being able to bring that to the in-venue, to the web, to the email, to all these different types of assets. But in those cases, where it does happen, where it's like, oh man, I sold this for 500,000, that's great. You should still sell that for 500 grand, because the reality is if you're selling that is the justification of what that asset is potentially worth. You might think through how to position that storytelling back to certain clients as well, though, right? Is it a story of value? Is it a story of engagement? Is it a story of awareness and impressions and reach? And so that's a lot of the work that we also do behind the scenes with the people that are our clients. Is we help them, how do you better position and how do you grow that revenue piece of the pie for yourselves, either through new revenue drivers or through retention plays. So, but yeah, that's great that you picked up on that. It's great question.
So to follow up that, you've got clients that have, done that assessment and seen the upside, and have, hey, here's our naming rights partner, and there's more value there. And how have they gone about, one, storytelling that upside, that underreported value? Both, is it a help with a renewal piece? Does it help with, leveling up that sponsorship going forward? How is that sort of nice find through, pulling the data together and finding that underreported value?
There's a multitude of examples, but a quick one that comes to mind, right? That's a really big differentiator for us is we do all this work with valuations and insights and reporting all in real time throughout the season, mind you, on a lot of it in-venue assets, right? So we're consistently plugged into gate attendance, running analysis in the way that we go about our valuations. But we found in 2022 that the average MLB baseball team had in-stadium assets in excess of $25 million on average plus of completely unreported value in their in-stadium assets. Right now, that does take into account, all the static signage, all the LEDs, concession areas, the fact that they have 81 home games, et cetera. But the fact that all of a sudden, when these groups are reporting back traditionally a couple $1 million of value on television and social, and all of a sudden you're now able to report $25 million of incremental value across, hundreds of partners, but that is real value that has never been uncovered, never been reported on. And so what we've found is that groups will report that back, and it has a really, really heavy play on retention, right? Wow, I did not realize that this was the true impact and value of what a lot of these things were worth. So retention wise, we see a lot of help that occurs there, but you also sort of have the interesting side effect too, where people are reallocating their spend internally, right? They might not be seeing the same return on a certain asset, and so they're changing it into rotational, or they're changing the locations, right? NBA teams, basketball stanchion is worth quite a bit. So, are they reallocating spend? Which again is a value driver because it increases the credibility of the brand or the agency or the team if they have those insights, but they're also able to optimize a lot of their return as a result. So you've seen a lot on retention, but it's the same with revenue drivers as well. So being able to go back and say, we have the opportunity to drive X if you do A, B, and C as a brand has also been really powerful for the acquisition effort in a lot of cases as well. And we work with a lot of our groups to prove that value for upsell opportunities, retention, as well as acquisition.
And does that does that lead, as it's not a flick the switch overnight and everybody gets it, but are you seeing over time as you're working with a couple of clients, from your early days, you're starting to see almost some flexibility in how the partnership is working, and being able to lean into assets that can skyrocket? Because there's the spots and dots, and this is the thing that we sponsor, and then for some reason it just goes hockey stick style on TikTok or Instagram, and
right.
You've just given millions and millions of impressions when you didn't realize, because there was someone photobombed a picture in the background or something funny happened, and it's you can never go back to the brief that we get is, can you make something viral? No, we can't. But but is there that flexibility to say, hey, here is the value we're going to deliver, and oh, by the way, this thing went really well, or like you said, this stanchion has been working really well this year, or this 6 inning stretch activation has been going much better than we expected. Does it start giving that flexibility to have that conversation, during the year to say, hey, we've already delivered it. Do you guys want to keep going? Do you want to do extra things for the playoffs? Is there that uplift potentially there as that conversation happens throughout the year?
If you ever want to come and sell for Trajektory, you're already perfectly positioning. But that's exactly right. And so you could argue it either way, up or down, either on the on the property side or on the agency side. But two examples, right, is teams will use this throughout the year because the data is in relative real time, where instead of waiting to the end of the year and all of a sudden, what typically a lot of the time happens in some cases is you get to the end of the year and you realize, oh, we missed on this, or email or radio didn't perform the way that we thought it would. And all of a sudden we're $200,000 under what we promised to deliver, whatever that number would be. With this, you have the ability to actually see how this is performing in real time and how it's actually trending towards what you were contractually obligated to do, whether or not that be time, whether or not that be engagements, impressions, value, you name it, because we have all this data and this info. So it has helped groups in a number of cases say, look, we're underperforming. We either need to double down and create twice the amount of content to be able to get to the number that we are dedicated to, or let's have a conversation with a client saying, hey, we're underperforming here. We're seeing a lot of really great success over here. So we're going to actually move your asset to make sure that we're building that credibility with our client and that we're doing the right thing. On the flip side, when we work with agencies and we work with brands, they're able to see all this information league-wide across, partners and across different assets and across different teams, where they can sit here and say, I'm making up this example in particular, but if a Geico is looking to better understand how State Farm is performing, they can see where State Farm is getting most of their value from a location, from a league, and by team, so that Geico is now better informed, either looking at their own data or looking at their competition, to then sit there and say, hey, we're spending a lot of money on, the vomitories in the lower bowl. We would be we could spend the same amount and get 3 times the return if we're on that basketball stanchion instead. So on the flip side, we're really empowering a lot of those agencies and brands to say, hey, we can optimize our revenue and optimize our return through this data. So and do that in real time throughout the season, which I think has been a real big unlock for a lot of groups as well.
So you've talked a little bit about, teams, agency, and brands. Like, I want to understand, and what the listeners understand. Who do you work with? Like, who are the orgs that you work with and would like to work with? Especially those attending seats, and then who are the roles? Who are the people that call you up, or who are the people that are, I guess, champions for Trajektory? In the business.
Well, at a high level, we work on both sides of the marketplace. So we work with teams and leagues, and we work with groups from all throughout the NFL, like the Seahawks and Commanders. We work with NBA, MLB teams. I'm a Chicago guy, so I got to mention the Cubs. NHL, MLS, NWSL, you name it. So we work with groups in virtually every single professional and other non-professional leagues throughout the U.S. We also work with major agencies and brands, right? And we've done project work with groups, such as Publicis, and we've also done some work with a lot of the local Chicago agencies that exist here as well. So we've gotten a lot of work very, very quickly, and I think we've done a lot of good work. But there's also really specific great use cases, and I know that we have an article that we produced with the Seattle Seahawks, and how we were working with Peter Bach over there and helping how do we produce and uncover value that they've never been able to report on. And so we've done a lot of good work. Typically we work with sponsorship teams, business intelligence teams, and CROs are usually the three core groups that we work with.
And is that normally like you're talking there about Peter from the Seahawks? Is normally that sort of initial call a similar one where it's like, hey Alex, we're doing this from a sponsorship revenue point of view. We think we're doing well. We're looking at other teams, and we're ranked quite well in what we're bringing from a revenue point of view, but we want to see where there's where there is more value. What are more assets? And it starts at that sort of sponsorship audit piece. Is that normally a good starting point for you, sort of pulling in the data to say, here's potentially assets that you're not selling?
So it can come from either direction. So at the end of the day, like, we are a technology SaaS company. So the idea is that organizations that work with our product have the ability to go and find a lot of these insights themselves, right? How are you doing against the competition? Where is there gaps where you could go sell more inventory, right? One of the things that we get into is how do we generate revenue through unsold inventory in areas that you could put sponsorship that you don't currently have it. But on the flip side, I think one of the things that we're also trying to be really different on is we have a really great customer success team. And so, if Peter comes to us and says, hey, we need to pull a stadium analysis or jersey analysis, we have a CS team that's dedicated to helping pull this data and pull this information and position it in the right way. So to your point, it can really come from either direction, right? We've built a tool that really allows people to go and find this and tell their own story. But at the same time, having worked in the industry, we also understand that we also need to be experts and good partners at the end of the day to also help position this data and pull this data in ways that can really unlock exceptional value. So yeah, we sort of take it in both accounts.
And again, going back to that original founder story, the person that benefits the most and uses the product on a daily basis. Again, it's not a recap tool. It's not a, hey, I'm building a sponsorship deck tool. It's a, hey, what's happening live? Whether it's from game to game, week to week. It is both the data and analytics folk that are trying to make that reporting happen, but also that sponsorship servicing executive that may be taking someone through a suite on a weekly basis. They can be up to date with telling them how all the things are performing, and point to the LED as it pops up in the third quarter and casually tell them how it's performing on a previously last week or currently.
You absolutely have the ability to get that granular. The joke I always make is you can, and actually our bread and butter is recaps, right? And so one of the big things that we do is we take what we found is historically a 1,000+ hour process. I mean, genuinely 1,000+ hours a year being spent by teams and agencies and brands, multiple different people pulling data together, having to restructure it. We've automated that entire process. And so we're taking the recaps that usually took 1,000 hours and genuinely allowing groups to automate and set those reports to go on a daily, don't ever do daily, it's too much, but like weekly, monthly, quarterly basis. So we do help with a lot of those recaps. But to answer your question, or at least respond to your comment, our power users are either those really frontline individuals who own the relationship, typically on the sponsorship side, who own dozens of different brands where they're responsible for pulling this data and sending it off to their client. Or on the flip side, depending on how an organization is structured, you have your BI people there, right? Okay, how are we going to generate more revenue? Where are there opportunities for us to sell more and assist with the sponsorship team? So typically our power users are either like the frontline folk on sponsorship and activation teams, or it's those BI folks who are really trying to dig into the data and get to answers that have historically been really difficult to answer.
Another piece I wanted to ask you about, because it's really close to my heart, like I said at Seed a couple of years ago, I want digital to be one of the number one driver of revenue for sport, because it's very easy to say that a lot of things are digital, but it's always been hard to say, hey, what worth is the team driving? Are you able with the product to sort of better justify and better provide those internal reports to say, hey, all that work that the digital team is doing and all that work that the BI team is doing is actually bringing in this value? Are you able to better assess that? So, at a C level, they're not just looking at likes and page views and impressions and going, way to go, digital team. They're actually saying, oh, that content series, that video series is bringing in this revenue, and that's why we can add to our department, because it is a revenue driver.
Yes, and I think the real differentiator with, I think, why we found a lot of success in helping groups with that comes back to something I said earlier, which is the underlying integrity of how we're going about our methodology, right? And I think what most people have sort of figured out about the other vendors that operate within the space is they're typically sitting here and saying, hey, 1 million impressions in New York is equal to 1 million impressions in Chicago is equal to 1 million impressions in Idaho. And like the reality is like, that's astronomically insane. Like these markets are very different. The assets that you're comparing are very different, but this is how it's been done for a long, long time. And so what we've instead done is we've said, look, the way to what smart brands are doing today is they're asking themselves, are we better off spending $1 million in Houston, or are we better off spending $1 million with the Houston Astros, right? We might be able to get in front of a similar demographic, but where are we going to get our best bang for our buck, right? And so for us to be able to start to equivocate value based on what are the prevailing market rates for individual areas and locations, but what are also those individualized dynamic rates for each individual asset, and how do those change and how do those evolve over time? That's a lot of how we're triangulating this. And then on top of that, how do we get really specific down to the actual individual entity? So, I won't go through all of our variables, but something like exclusivity, right? If you're a brand and you're paying a premium to have an exclusive in a certain stadium where you have the benefit of essentially closing out your competition, that is a premium value. And why is that not being considered in a lot of these valuation processes, whether or not you're an agency or a brand buying it, or whether or not you're the team that's providing an exclusivity? And so we take all of these blended approaches and we put them together to come up with a methodology that has a very high integrity for really trying to, again, solve the relative value of all these things to one another. And so I would just point out and say that like all of that has culminated, I think, in a much better way than I think what the industry has typically been used to over the last, decade and a half or so.
Now it's time for the Sports Geek Amplify Triple Threat.
A lot of times when clients say, hey, Sean, can you look at a product? Can you tell us, one, is it a real thing? Are they shooting straight? One of the things I do apply to it is a triple threat. Look at over 3 things. And it's a lot of time where some of these pieces fall over. And we've covered some of them, but I just want to dive back into them. The first one is time. Like a product gets presented, here's Trajektory. It solves all of these problems. But most sports, and even in agency lands, time poor, resource poor. We're looking for ways to get things done.
It's expensive.
How does Trajektory? How is it a time saver, or how do you save time for your clients to make them more efficient? And I know you've already touched on it, but what's the kind of feedback you're getting from clients from a time saving point of view?
Concisely said, if anyone's listening and you've ever worked at a team and you've ever been responsible for having to pull data, you probably know what a pain in the butt it is to bring the stuff together. And it's often lost on just the literally thousands of hours spent a year cleaning data, restructuring data to still only put something together that's incomplete. Because we're bringing in all the data programmatically, because we're cleaning and structuring the data, and because we're applying this methodology to it, all of this data is in our platform in relative real time. So you're literally going from a situation on the team side, especially in the league side, of thousands of hours a year to something that you can literally automate in a matter of minutes at the beginning of your season to send you any frequency and automated reports that you want. On the flip side, for a traditional agency or a brand, you're pulling your hair out trying to collect these reports and put these pieces together. And, God forbid, you even have the time or the resources to figure out how to optimize your spend. Again, all of that data is there ready for you to use and to understand, and we're there to help as good partners, but to help individuals understand you don't have to pull all this data together to even figure out, was it worth it? That data is there. Now you can actually use this data to optimize your spend. And last thing I'll say on it, and I'll get off my soapbox, is while it saves all of this data, it's really hard to, at times, really fathom how much time and sunk costs go into the resources that are sunk having to go into pulling all this data, and how that time can be spent generating revenue elsewhere is usually missed. Not to mention the fact that the other thing that we didn't even talk about is, now that we're able to automate these reports across the board, most groups are really probably only pulling reports for the top 20% of their clients, with the bottom 80% not even getting data at all. So it's not just time, you're now actually able to report across the entire portfolio.
Yeah. Definitely. Like, I think there's the, freeing up the resources of, your BI team, or, multiple resources that are pulling all that data. They could be putting in more effort into, selling tickets, or, like you said, starting to bring that servicing level that they've only been doing with their premiums further down, which again potentially gives you a breadth of sponsors because they're able to service more. So I think the time one, is a no-brainer, and that's where a lot of the tools do tick the box once you've got past that learning curve, and you can allocate your time to be doing more analysis and strategy because you've got the data in front of you. Then the second one is money, and a lot of tools will come at sport and say, hey, this is a great tool, and you're either solving a problem and you're a utility. But I really feel post-COVID, the threshold of, oh, no, we need a tool that either saves us a ton of money and that's why we're using it, or it makes us money. Like, there's this real focus now that if it's just a tool that is a utility, and it's, it's harder to get through the door and harder to get through. But whereas if you can do the justification that it's a terrific cost saving, or it helps bring in revenue, what's your answer to that? How does Trajektory sort of answer that problem?
But wait, there's more. It slices, it dices, it does this, it does that. Look, I mean, simply said, there is an advantage to having done this after seeing a lot of the problems. And I'm setting us up to effectively say, groups out there today are routinely paying $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year just for a social reporting platform. They're spending $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year just for television data and analytics. That's astronomically insane. And so effectively what we've created with our pricing model is, hey, like, we can do all these things. We do more, we do it better, we have better depth of data, and we can actually help you come out ahead and save. So instead of having to compartmentalize all these things, if you can combine it all together, we have economies of scale. So typically our pricing is, you can retire all of your legacy spend, in individually, we're not the cheapest option out there. We're putting our flag in the ground saying, if you want the best data available, we're the group for you. But when you put it all together, a lot of groups are actually coming out ahead. So we're actually helping save cash from retirement of legacy spend. But at the same time, and I think where we're very uniquely positioned is we're a vendor that helps you drive revenue and helps you drive money at the end of the day. So a lot of these other groups help drive insights. We do that, but we're actually also driving tangible revenue that has never been reported on. So we are trying to sort of sit on both sides of that. That's like a cop-out answer. I realize that, but it's the truth.
But it's also, I guess it's like how you go about selling. Like, and again, if you're talking to the sponsorship executive, it's, well, how can we help you bring in more revenue? We can identify that, and again, no matter what it costs, we'll bring an uplift there. And if they're just looking at that revenue focus, you go, cool, we can justify it there. It's just sort of like, how do you pitch it internally, to a board or to a CRO to say, hey, we want this tool. And depending if they're, a CRO and they're revenue focused, well, you can pitch well, there's all this extra revenue, or if it's you're pitching it to a CFO, and we had Graham Maher, a CFO. He told us how to pitch to a CFO. It's like, well, then you could be pitching from a costs point of view, and I think it's always important to help that internal case of how do I, and I'm always fascinated with that in how do you pitch, and it's different for different ones, and so depending on the focus, you can go either way.
I agree. I could say more, but I won't get on a soapbox.
No, that's fine. And then the last one, again, it's from a tool, and you mentioned a little bit with your customer success team. Like, what are the resources needed to implement? Like, I guess from that early on piece of connecting all the digital plumbing, so all that data is coming into your system, so you can start reporting it. What does that initial onboarding phase look like? Because again, a sports team or a league or a brand goes, oh, great, we got it quick. It's not like Microsoft Office, you put the CD in and you press open. Like, what does that initial onboarding phase look like? Apologies to people who don't know what a CD is and have never put one into a computer. I've just dated myself. And then the other piece is, what does it look like from a maintenance point of view, ongoing piece, from a resource point of view?
Yeah. So first and foremost, from an onboarding perspective, we really truly try to take 90% of the lift. And most of how we try to structure the onboarding process is, tell us where the bodies are buried. We're going to go grab the data. We're going to clean it. We're going to structure it. We're going to put it into the platform. At the same time, I think us as an organization, we are most keenly focused on always continually trying to figure out, how do we continue to optimize that onboarding process, right? And so, over time, we've really now started to bring that process down to a really tight, like 4 to 6 weeks. But what that means is that week 1, we're going to have your social up and connected and ready to go. By the end of the second week, it's going to be all of your television data. So how do we start to get you some of that really high value content immediately? And the rest of that is us behind the scenes, creating those data models because they're all specific to the client, getting all of that LED, arena static, concourse, premium areas, email, web, you name it, getting the rest of that connected. And so for us, we make it really, really easy, where we essentially turn on all your digital in the first week or two. And then beyond that, that's when we get to work and do a lot of that dirty work to then set up a system that is just self-maintaining. So moving forward, the maintenance on it from a client perspective is very, 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 very small, because what we really pride ourselves on is let us do the heavy lift and get this data in a usable form for you on an ongoing basis. And
then ongoing, it's the people whose roles are in sponsorship and data are the end users. It's not like, hey guys, we've got Trajektory, we need to go hire a Trajektory person to interpret it for us. It's the people in those roles that previously were doing the recaps. They're the ones that are using the product on a day-to-day basis.
Exactly right. So we get it set up. We continue to maintain it. Our whole goal, because the reality is like when we sat in the seats, and again, it comes in the perspective, like nothing pissed us off more than like when we had to do the heavy lift, for an onboarding process where we had to continue to keep things going. What we are really, creating and continue to optimize and really trying to get down to like an absolute like zero impact on clients is point us in the right direction and we'll get out of your way and all you have to do is use the data and drive revenue from it.
Terrific. Well, what I do want to remind people is you can catch up with Alex at Seat in Salt Lake City. Go to seatconference.com. I'm sure all the digital and data folk we'll be looking forward to having a chat with you. And as happens at Seat, over a few drinks, you can really dive deep on some of those use cases and how it's being used. If you do see Alex, please mention Sports Geek. If he's wearing a Sports Geek t-shirt, it'll be much easier. But say hello, and if you can't find him, let me know. I'll make sure you find him. Tell him you listen to the podcast. Really would appreciate it. And what I'm going to do to finish up is I'm going to do the Sports Geek pitch, and this is where I take what you've said and roll it into a pitch formula, which effectively gives someone an elevator pitch, which is, how what we do is, in fact, and so I use it as a tool when helping people refine their pitches. It can be used both for a product or a service. So here's my go at it after our conversation. You're more than welcome to use it going forward. You know how there's a mad scramble 2 times a year, contract recap and sponsorship sales close where assets and valuation are needed? What Trajektory do is provide a platform for all sponsorship assets to keep rights holders and sponsors informed on what is working and what is being delivered. In fact, clients have found millions in delivered value in helping to re-sign existing sponsors and attract new ones. There you go. You can. Is that a good elevator pitch for Trajektory?
Come hang out with me at the Seat conference when you guys are here, and I'll give you a very similar elevator pitch. No, that was great. So thank you for that. That's awesome.
Terrific. So lastly, please go to sportsgeekamplify.com/trajectory. I will mention how Trajektory is spelled. TRAJEKTROY. It's very hard. But the main thing is getting that K in there. Or trajectory.com or sportsgeek.com. All the links will be with this podcast. Wherever you've found it, you can hit a button to book a call with Alex. I will get people in touch. And don't forget, go to seatconference.com. Alex, thank you very much for coming on the episode. And I look forward to catching up in Salt Lake City.
Thank you, Sean. I look forward to it as well.
Have you listened to the Sports Geek Amplify series presented by Seat Conference? Go to sportsgeekamplify.com to listen. To connect with Alex at Trajektory, go to sportsgeekamplify.com/trajectory. Watch all Sports Geek Amplify interviews at sportsgeekamplify.com and meet the guests at Seat Conference in Salt Lake City in July 2023. This has been a Sports Geek production.